Straight up, this shit is about money. That's all it is. And we talking about flat blackness today. And yet again, we finding more incidents of it. But at the end of the day, this don't have nothing to do with justice. It doesn't have nothing to do with accuracy. It comes down to money and the exclusion of black men and boys. What's up, y'all? Y'all know what it is. Welcome back to the Onyx Report, Black Masculinist news for the day. We're about to get it in. Like I said, man, we're dealing with flat blackness today. One of the reasons we're dealing with it is it's pretty elusive. Now, what is it? Well, this is a concept that I initially first heard from Yvette Carnell and Antonio Moore in the ADOS movement. And they were talking about it in terms of lineage and nationality. And there's merit to that. I'm a university professor. I have seen even my institution try and play with the definition of blackness and avoid having to deal with the fact that the number of African American students have been dropping over the years, and they've been replacing them with different groups that identify as black. Now, in and of itself, I don't have a problem with black folk identifying as black folk no matter where we're from. But it is a problem when institutions use that definition, right, to exploit African American folk. But that's not what I use when I talk about flat blackness. I regard it in a gender context. What I found takes place often is that when it comes to issues that people want to get attention for, they use black men's numbers to bolster the seriousness of it and bait and switch you. So by the time you come in to hear about the subject, you primarily get something about black women, girls, etc., at the expense of accuracy for boys and men. And even if the data is part of the story, it's played down, diminished, and deflected. And that's a problem. Today's example of flat blackness comes from a unique situation. This is for a television show. So this website you can find, this is rollingout.com. They got an article written by Terry Shropshire today, or I should say January 23rd. And it's entitled A Different Cry. TV series examines rising rates of suicide in young blacks, right? So it says, Diaz said the explosion of social media has added another dimension that has aided in intensifying and amplifying bullying to a greater degree that's never been seen before. Social media aspect is so much that I think parents are struggling. How do you deal with this? When we were growing up, it was different, right? But now people can say so much on social media, and that's, I think, the toughest part that could be just relentless for a child that's going through that. Right? Oh, actually, this is the second page. Let me move backward to the first. Right? That. Anyway, so here you go. That's Monica Diaz and Madison Carter right there. And they begin the article with most adults recall being bullied and talked about and even traumatized by their mentors at times during their formative school years, but most survived and even thrived in adulthood. So why are black kids killing themselves at much higher rates today than previous generations? Why is the black suicide rate twice that of their white counterparts? Right? Madison Carter, Monica Diaz, and their team of investigative journalists set out to uncover what's precipitating preteens and teens taking their own lives like never before. The three-part TV special, A Different Cry, which airs beginning Sunday, January 23rd, could also be titled Suffering and Dying in Silence, due to the fact that the alarming upward trend in suicides in young blacks has gone unnoticed. Right? It says the bullying is different today, and I think that's what's so shocking, said Carter, who works with a team of investigative journalists called Atticus at WXIA in Atlanta. Carter added that when she was a kid, students got a break from bullying once they got off the bus. Today, through technological advances, kids are being bullied relentlessly. She says it doesn't stop, and kind of goes from there. Now, why do I single this article out? Well, it's dealing with black youth suicide. I thought that was particularly important. I'm glad this series is happening. As a father, I definitely want to see this take place, where we can actually see support for our kids. All right. Here's the issue, though. was a lot of emphasis in this article placed on youth and kids, and understandably why. Because when I went to actually look at the data, the most recent data I found regarding race and gender, particularly among those committing suicide and are underage, I found the same disparity I tend to find more regularly, and it is what it is. So that being said, let's pull up what it is. This here is from Research Brief, right? Gender differences in Black youth suicide came out summer 2021. And it's based on CDC data from 2020, right? And it's identifying groups of Black youth who are age 15 to 24. Now, even prior to actually looking at the title, because sometimes I pull these up and I jump right in. I don't even really look at the authors' names, but I could tell that they were either feminists or women or both before I even looked at their names, once I read through it. And the reason why is very subtle, right? When you read through this, one of the things they talk about here is that suicide can be defined as the act of an individual taking their own life, whereas suicidal ideation can be described as experiencing thoughts and feelings about suicide. Now, at various points in this article, and I'm going to leave it linked in the description box for you to peruse at your discretion, you'll find a series of reflections at random points about suicidal ideation. Again, when kids are thinking about suicide. So here you see them using the term repeatedly, black youth, and that's all well and good. One of the things you start to see after a while is they start to fixate on Black female adolescents and the fact that they have more suicidal ideations, right? They think about suicide more often. They think about suicide from younger ages, and you'll find that kind of happening recurrently. Now, they do admit that Black adolescent boys tend to suffer from injury to a greater degree after suicide attempts if they don't complete the suicide, or from lethal weapons they use. They're hospitalized to a greater degree, but they spend a lot of time, as you can see here, right, where they talk about Black girls and the occurrence of multiple suicide ideations. A culturally and gender responsive provider should know this should be encouraged to ask about suicide ideation in Black girls. Now, they do mention boys a little bit earlier in regard to that, and they do appropriately say that any work that one does in regard to suicide work should take race and gender into account and look at the practices that lead to suicide ideation and suicide attempts, right? But the focus here is more specifically on just acknowledging there needs to be a plan, but not actually really focusing on what it is. But there are repeated attempts throughout the piece to identify Black girls. Now, I'm happy that they're dealing with Black girls. Don't get me wrong. I'm not upset about that. What I'm having a problem with is the degree to which the impact on boys tends to get lost. The impact on men tends to get downplayed. And they're downplayed, right, to meet an idea, to meet a priority that's been given to women and girls that's not been given to men in the same kind of way. Now, what's the big point? Well, let's start with the actual data. The reason I decided to look up this study says, according to a recent report, the CDC in 2020 indicates that suicide is the third leading cause of death for Black youth, ages 15 to 24 in the U.S. When examining rates of suicide among Black youth by gender, 164 adolescent females and 609 adolescent males died by suicide in 2017. Between 1991 to 2017, suicide rates increased by 73% for Black youth, and injury by attempt increased 122% for adolescent Black males. These alarming rates continue to rise from year to year among all youth, but particularly Black youth. The obscurity in the language concerns me, because if boys are actually taking their lives nearly 6 times more than girls in the Black community, and then we step back and say, well, suicide rates are increasing, injury by attempt increased by 122%. If those things are increasing alongside with suicide in general, and yet boys are doing it 6 times more, why aren't we having conversations about more specific? Like, there has to be space for conversations, as this article, this particular piece out of University of North Carolina, Charlotte, as they advocate, there needs to be conversations about race and gender specific issues as it pertains to suicide. But when you go back to the TV show that's about to come on, they just focus on Black youth. And usually if there's a gender component to these kind of things, gender use, it has kind of become a shorthand for, female. So the gender approach tends to leave out black men and boys, or in this instance, boys, even though they're actually committing suicide at 6 times the number, at least up until up and through this CDC 2020 study, 6 times more. And I'm curious to find out what the impact of the pandemic has been on boys and men in general in regard to suicide, especially considering just 2 days ago on Twitter, public, you can look at it on my Twitter account. There's a brother that reached out to me, complimented me on my work, and ended his statement by saying, I'm about to end it all. And I'm paraphrasing. And when I said, well, appreciate the help, but just to be clear, you're about to end what? And he said he's about to take his life. And so we went into the DMs. We had a conversation from there, and I wish the brother well. I hope he's well. But black men reach out to me all the time on The Verge. Like, still not a lot of conversation about black male suicide, but most particularly, especially in regard to our boys. We don't tend to really talk about how they're doing. And so when we do have opportunities to talk about it and it gets clouded under generic terms like black or generic terms like youth, that's what I regard in this sense as flat blackness. It's a way of flattening out the experience, in this case, of black girls and boys as it pertains to suicide, while at the same time dismissing the boys in terms of the emphasis. Even in this report, they spend more time talking about female suicidal ideation, meaning thoughts about suicide, but the boys are actually committing it 6 times more. See, that's a consistent trope when it comes to suicide. In general, across race, women attempt suicide in much higher numbers than men. Men complete suicide in much higher numbers than women. So women tend to have a greater number of suicidal ideations, but men tend to fucking commit suicide. And although ideations are important, it reminds me of something that Dr. Tommy Curry said once when he was on Yvette Carnell's show. He said, this all has to do with the attempt to make attention outweigh death. That's what we're doing. That's what we're still doing, both in the TV article and in this one here. It's the attempt to make attention outweigh death. That's what we're focused on. And we're doing it to such a great degree that feelings and actual results are damn near synonymous, if not replaced by feelings altogether. Because we don't want anybody to feel bad, regardless of what's actually happening to people. And I think it contributes to the further underdevelopment of black boys. Because we don't have program-specific responses. We don't even have program-specific responses to employment. We don't have program-specific responses to, helping black male small entrepreneurial small businesses. We don't have specific programming or targeted specific funding in regard to any of those groups. The overwhelming majority of it, as it pertains to black folk, tends to go to women and boys. Shout out to my boy Calvin Mann, who does extensive work on black male suicide, particularly black male youth suicide. He actually said there's up to $7 billion being targeted toward women and girls. Boys get none of that. So I look at this stuff and it really pisses me off in terms of how many areas I've seen this in. Y'all know a couple months ago I did a video covering a Harvard Gender Psi Lab report. It was a Harvard report having to do with who was dying more from COVID. And the article was fixated, even in its titling, on black women. The article title, you can actually find it on blackenterprise.com. It's entitled, Black Women Are Dying of COVID-19 at Higher Rates Than Men in Other Racial Ethnic Groups. Now, if you don't pay attention specifically to in other racial ethnic groups, the way the article reads, or the title, Black Women Are Dying of COVID at Higher Rates Than Men in Other Racial Groups, it sounds as if they're saying they're dying higher than men, period. Right? They're just, And according to the article, they're dying 4 times the amount of white men, 3 times the amount of Asian men. But when you go through the article at the very kind of bottom of one of the bullet points, they got a 1-sentence little statement. Oh, by the way, black men are dying 6 times more than white men. They're not the focus, though. They're not the title of the article. And this goes back to what I said at the beginning of the damn video. The reason they're not the focus, the reason black males are not the focus across so many matrices is because at the end of the day, this is about funding. This is about money. And right now, Nobody wants to spend money on black men and boys. They don't. And you're a sexist if you call it out. So to be a good black man, you just got to be quiet. I have a son. I'm not about to sit here and watch this shit happen and not say anything. And I look at his face every day. Not happening. This underdeveloping and diminishment, deflection, all these things that are happening to black boys, even in print, absolutely ridiculous. Hell, earlier, I want to say this might have been a week ago. I posted a chart that I think it had to do with employment that a particular professor put up on Twitter. And it had to do with the numbers of, people who were unemployed. And I'm going to find it here and put it up on the screen for you, because I found it interesting how readily we could accept unemployment. And at the same time, the way, not the study itself, but the way professionals were talking about the study, they were eliminating the very existence of black men and boys, and most were comfortable with that. Most didn't have a problem with it. It's one of the reasons that I'm happy to see that there are people starting to come out that are calling this stuff out. Because the extent to which black boys and men are being eliminated and erased from the conversation is fundamentally misandrist. If you don't know what misandrist or misandric refers to, misandry basically refers to the hatred of men. Right? It is the counterpart of misogyny. But most people know what misogyny is, even if they've never heard of misandry or misandry, depending on how you pronounce it. Right? I find that people are quite comfortable with misandry because most people don't know what it is. So in as much as it's not acceptable to be a misogynist, you can comfortably be a misandrist and nobody will say a word. And one of the differences is that you can do this in a what I call a refined manner, or in a very coarse and brazen manner, right? Where, like on Twitter, you see people talking about, black men are bullet bags. Well, that would be what I would call, coarse misandry. So here it is, right? This is coming from Kristen E. Brody, PhD. And she says, the growing racial disparity in employment underscores that the economic recovery is being impeded by systemic bias against black workers, particularly black women and teens. I thought that was interesting. Shout out to my boy, Torrin Walker on Twitter, sent me the chart she was referring to. And if you look at the chart, yeah, it's about as big as I can get it. Right here in the center, this center category is for black. And to the slight left of that is women. And they have a range going back from 2021 of 7.0 to 10.5. I'm sorry, 7.0 to 6.2 to 8.5, right? In terms of unemployment from December 2020 to December 2021, 6.2 to 8.5 over that time period. For black males, it's 7.0 to 10.5. And then when you looked at the combined ones for ages 16 to 19 for men and women, see, these are boys and girls combined, it's 24.2. Right? For whites combined between age 16 to 19, it's 14.4. For Latinos, 16 to 19, it's 16.9. But for black, it's 24.2. But when you look at the disparities between black male and black female unemployment, how do you leave out black men? And how does that in turn not make you look at the data regarding 16 to 19-year-olds and question who exactly comprises the majority of those numbers? If we can see that black male unemployment is consistently higher across the board. I mean, hell, and I've been saying this for a while now. Even before the pandemic, in over 35 major cities, black male unemployment was up to 40 and 50%. That is unheard of. Unheard of. You're going to tell me that that has no impact on youth unemployment? Especially considering boys and the experiences they're having in K through 12? Really? Where by the 8th grade, only 10% are literate? only 12% in math and science. And that's not going to have an impact on employment before they reach the age of 18, let alone what happens to them after. See, this is just like the chart on suicide, right? There was a dramatic increase in suicide across the board, but, and they talk about the suicidal increase in terms of ideation for Black girls and, yeah, but boys are taking their lives at 6 times the number of girls. And you can't have a race, gender specific conversation about that, even out of necessity for helping our boys. No, we're going to spend more time talking about people's feelings regarding suicide as opposed to those who actually take their lives. The attempt to make attention outweigh death. That's what we're dealing with. This is absolutely ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. I'm going to put all these links in the comment section so you guys can check them out yourself. You can decide what you want to do. These are things you want to address. And I hope you do. Because I don't enjoy reporting on these things. I'm not smiling. This isn't fun. It's not. I've been working with Black youth since I was one. I've been working with Black males just as long. And you know what? I wonder how long it's going to take before we can take this seriously. Really. Because the misandry has really been reaching an epic level. I'll show you what a brother sent me earlier today. Hold on. And it's just stupid at times. Just absolutely stupid. Here. This is what I was sent. Men who don't wear jackets in cold weather do so with the express intent of intimidating women and to make women feel like lesser beings. If you see a man who's not wearing a jacket when you're cold, then call him out for his toxic masculinity and ego violence. This is where we are. This is the Twitter version, to some extent, of what we saw in the report on suicide. Emphasis on girls, emphasis on feelings, emphasis on opinion, emphasis on downplaying men. And in this example, it's purely misandrous. The hatred of men is real. And it's become institutionalized to the point where when you're talking about even the studies that shape the funding, when misandry plays a factor, boys and men suffer policy-wise. That's why I'm fighting at the level of vocabulary, because that precedes the studies that precedes funding. I'm creating the vocabulary along with a number of good brothers who are trying to do the same so that we can actually begin to articulate what Black men are experiencing. And when you can articulate it, then you can actually start to perform studies, because now you have the better analytical tools to use to develop them. And then when you're able to produce those studies, then you can start to lobby and push for policy that uses those studies to make a point about how much Black men and boys are suffering. See, this is a project that Black feminists have been engaged in since the 1980s, late 70s at that. Feminists themselves since the 60s, unless you want to go back to the first wave in the late 19th century. But my point is, they created the language, they created the studies. They're the majority in education in the academy, so shouldn't be much of a surprise. And then from there, they were able to produce the policy. So now you have policies that are being written, practices that are going in on targeting and uplifting girls and women, while completely ignoring men and boys whose numbers are often worse on the very issues that they're lobbying for funding for. And most Black men say, okay, well, yeah, support. Glad the sisters are getting it. And often don't realize that their own numbers are worse. And it isn't to say that Black women shouldn't get support. It should simply be that if Black women are getting support and Black boys and men's numbers are worse, doesn't it stand a reason they should get support? I don't know. You tell me. I'm not seeing it. Peace.